All right. Hello, everybody. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, whatever it is that you are in the world today. Welcome to CSCMP Career Panel webinar hosted by the Young Professional Committee at CSCMP. My name is Alex Sanchez, and I'm the Senior Marketing Manager at the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals, or CSCMP. I'm seeing that we have some attendees joining still, about 19 coming in and a few more still joining. So while we wait a little bit to allow them in, I would like, on behalf of the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals, to sincerely thank our members for their continued support, which makes really possible for us to make this type of content available to everybody. For anyone that is interested in CSCMP membership information, please go to our website, cscmp.org, and you can find additional details there, as well as a list of upcoming webinar and events just like this one. Please note that everybody and all attendees on this webinar are muted for a better experience, but we definitely want to make this interactive and we want to hear from you. So we would love for you to submit any questions that you have at any time using the question box in the GoToWebinar control panel. Also, please note that any rebroadcasting or retransmitting of this webinar is strictly prohibited without the proper authorization from CSCMP. That's really all I have to do here. So with that out of the way, I would like to introduce Michael Walters, our moderator for the day. So take it away, Michael.
Yeah, thanks so much, Alex. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone calling in. Excited. Looks like we've got a good audience here today. So really excited to be here. And thanks for joining us for our first ever CSCMP Young Professionals Career Panel. So again, my name is Michael Walters, and I'll be the moderator for today's event. We've got a great group of panelists lined up that are really eager to share some of their insights into the supply chain industry, some of their experiences in different roles, and really hope to cater this to some of our young professional and student members, whether you're a student interested in supply chain and working to understand where you might want to go into, or a young professional maybe trying to get into supply chain, or looking for a career transition. Our panelists come with a wide variety of backgrounds and experiences there. So all of our panelists, including myself, are members of our Young Professionals Committee. So I'll give a little plug. We are accepting applicants for the Young Professionals Committee, I think through Monday. So feel free to look on LinkedIn. I know CSCMP has been broadcasting the application, or CSCMP's website. So format of today's event, it'll be pretty informal. So we'll do introductions around this group. We've got a number of preset or pre-staged questions that we'll ask our panelists. And then really, as Alex alluded to, want this to be interactive. So we've got an audience Q&A session. I'll be monitoring the questions throughout. So please submit questions for any of the panelists or more broadly, and we'll continue to moderate those and incorporate them as we go through. So to kick it off with some introductions, I'll ask the panel to give all the panelists to give a background on their introduction into supply chain, their educational background, and then some of their career and professional experiences, and ultimately how they got to where they are today. So I'll kick it off and then pass it around. So again, my name is Michael Walters. So I'm currently working at 3M in our strategic sourcing group. I'm a graduate of the University of Wisconsin and have a background from an educational standpoint in supply chain and operations. Had a number of internships through that realm in operations and logistics landscapes before ultimately landing myself in procurement at 3M. So from a professional standpoint, I've spent the entirety of my full-time career with 3M strategic sourcing, and I'm currently managing a number of polymers and chemicals raw material categories that go into our manufacturing sites. So when you talk about those roles and responsibilities, it's talking about supply continuity, cost management, and ensuring cost competitiveness, and understanding what's happening in the external markets, working capital, contracting, negotiations, and generally just managing the holistic supplier relationships that we have. So next, I'll hand it off to Victoria.
Sure. Thanks, Michael. So hi, everyone. My name is Victoria Brown, and I am currently Senior Product Manager at Koerber Supply Chain. We are an enterprise warehouse management systems software provider, and there I lead the strategic direction of where the product needs to go. If you're an end user and you use a warehouse management, there's a good chance that you work with our product. I actually started my career in supply chain. I studied management engineering with a focus in operations at Worcester Polytechnic Institute, better known as WPI, in Worcester, Mass. I am Boston based, and I actually had a couple internships with a few different companies. So I interned with companies like Procter & Gamble and Frito-Lay, as well as Steelcase Furniture, so all different consumer goods organizations. And then when I started full-time, I actually went and worked as a software engineer at first for Vistaprint, which we made all of our own supply chain software in-house. Quickly realized that I didn't want to stare at a screen all day working on software, and I wanted to be back boots on the ground. So that's when I went back to Frito-Lay, where I had interned and worked full-time as an operations manager in the manufacturing facility in the warehouse. So from there, I went back to grad school and then went into consulting and research for about 5 years, and then transitioned over to the product side of supply chain in the software world just about 2 years ago. So I have used the software, I have written the software, and now I lead the strategy behind the software. So kind of a zigzag path. And I'll hand over to Christian.
I believe I will give it to Chelsea first, and then just to, or
I can jump in.
Okay.
Yeah, so thank you both for that kickoff. So I'm Chelsea Howard. I'm currently an enterprise account manager at FreightPlus. I'm also now Boston based as of like a few months ago, coming from Florida. So yeah, really looking forward to winter. I think that's what they're talking about with winter is coming. It's a Floridian in Boston. So we're gonna see how that goes. But it's a blast. I'm loving it up here. Really happy to have made the move. So as far as like how I got into transportation, we're actually just doing a YouTube on this. You'll always say that you either were born into it or you stumbled into it. So I'm one of those people that tripped. I just happened to get involved with a society at school, which ended up leading into an opportunity for an internship, which led to a full-time or a part-time job. And then once I graduated, I was able to transition that into full-time. And then, I've established myself throughout the internship and part-time, and then took that into supervisor and manager. And then, then I just got hooked. So, and I kind of wore a bunch of different hats. I started Houston Logistics, part of the NYK group, and then over to Transplace, and then, which just recently got bought out by Uber Freight. So you might have seen that in the news. And now I'm at FreightPlus. So I've worn a bunch of different hats across all of that, from like data analytics, sales support, kind of all across the board, all the other groups, the project management, things like that, and now account management, all the different kind of business cycle components that come along with transportation that I wouldn't have thought of before I'd gotten into the industry. So it's not just operations like I was picturing. I don't know why, but it was, which was great for me because I went to University of North Florida and studied business administration and management. So it had, I think maybe by the time, like once I got the internship, I took foundations of transportation to get some kind of experience, but yeah, so just got hooked on the industry, and that's what brought me up today.
Cool, then I'll continue. Thanks guys for the introduction. What a journey already. You can see a diversity of journeys here. Yeah, my name is Christian. I'm working currently as a senior consultant in the supply and operations team based in Zurich, Switzerland, currently for EY, for Ernst & Young. Previous to that, so I'll start with my studies. I did my bachelor's in logistics, engineering, and economics in a small town in the Netherlands that nobody knows. And Netherlands is known for its infrastructure in terms of road, air, and sea. So that's why I chose, just to justify it, why I chose to do my studies there. And then I did a couple of internships for Samsung, DB Schenker, and Kuehne Nagel. So I come from a freight forwarder background, more or less, so heavily involved in operations, warehousing, optimization, control towers. I think that rings a bell in terms of, okay, how do we manage operations, like Victoria and Chelsea mentioned previously, and to link it with Michael. And then I moved to Switzerland as a result of my graduation internship. So I worked here in Zurich 2 years as a performance manager for Kuehne Nagel, again, continuing the journey in the freight forwarding world, but more based in the pharmaceutical industry. And since I liked being active in this environment due to the impact that we had on the final consumer, I decided to try a more specialized company, American-based, also in Switzerland, and then move to where I am right now at EY. So this is briefly about the career journey, and yeah, I'm completing my blended masters together with MIT and ASU, Arizona State. Shout out to ASU, best university in the world. So yeah, so that's from my side, and yeah, looking forward to the discussion that we'll have. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much to all the panelists. Really great introductions, as you could tell. A lot of diverse backgrounds in terms of the work experience they've all had. So hopefully we can dig into those a little bit more as we ask some of these questions here. So the first one we'll kick off is probably a common question in today's realm, right? There's a lot of challenges across supply chain. Whether you're talking about port congestion, lead time delays, raw material shortages, labor issues, inflation, right? There's a lot of things that we've experienced, I think, in our young professional years in the last 2, right? So I'll send it over to Chelsea first. I know you have some experience, especially in your new role, in more of a startup type environment in building a supply chain from kind of the ground up. So could you maybe talk about some of the largest challenges that you're currently facing in your role or industry?
Yeah, so honestly, I think the biggest, personally, what I'm fighting through, I guess, right now is a learning curve, which is honestly, it's the most valuable aspect you could incorporate into your career, in my personal opinion. But I mean, early on, I got thrown to the wolves, like that part-time internship and the supervisor positions and stuff. I was really thrown to the wolves. We did not have enough direction and stuff. But that put me on a trajectory of just learning and getting exposure to things you can't get in class, and you wouldn't for the first 5 years of your career. So I'm kind of getting a lot of the past couple months, I've been getting a lot of flashbacks to right when I straight out of college and I started my real professional career. Just all these learning experiences. I'm having to remind myself, okay, remember 6 months after this frustrating thing, 6 months later, I was, light years ahead of where I would have been. Yes, I, got egg on my face. I look, inexperienced or, ill-prepared or something in certain circumstances. But then within 6 months, I'm way further than I ever would have been if I just kind of trickled along. So, so that's kind of where I'm at right now, is going to, kind of the same industry, but I'm coming from the brokerage, kind of standard traditional brokerage side, with intermodal, so rail and truck, was 90% of our business, or 80 to 90, and the rest was just straightforward truck, so full containers. Sorry. And now we do so much. My new company do a lot more LTL, almost exclusively LTL and things like that. So, and we're also a managed transportation company, which not only different modes that I haven't, don't have as much experience in, but also has a whole new kind of, it's becoming new approach to transportation right now in the industry. So it's actually something Transplace did, and we're seeing to start get some traction. Like I mentioned, Uber Freight buying Transplace was unheard of. Transplace is usually doing the acquisitions, but because we think, we're seeing that the industry is starting to go that way. You're moving from a brokerage model to really managed transportation, becoming a business partner with your clients, as opposed to just transactional and running rates and things like that. So kind of a whole new kind of ideology learning about, and those different company, different people, different environment, and they had different modes. So most rewarding, but I think that's the biggest challenge I'm going through.
Great, yeah, no, thanks so much. And to shift it a little bit over to Victoria next here, right, you have a diverse background in transportation, consulting, more recently really engaged from a warehousing perspective. What types of challenges are you seeing in those types of industries? I know maybe inventory is very tight, and how does that reflect yours? So I'll open it up to what you have there.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head earlier when you mentioned how much is happening right now. And that's the reality of the challenge is there's so much happening. How do you wrap your head around it, right? And so kind of to touch on what Chelsea said, the models are changing, right? Like we went from full shipment loads to LTL, and this happened as e-commerce rose, but it's just been exacerbated the last 2 years. So I think the biggest challenge we have, and especially in software where things are a little bit delayed because you might make changes in the software, but by the time you deploy and people go live, takes time. And so it's keeping up on what's happening in the industry, knowing what that is, it a fleeting trend or is it like a trend that's going to be pervasive over time? And so just trying to stay up to date and relevant on what all is happening. That in and of itself is a whole task. But then it's carrying it through for what do supply chains really need versus what might be like, the trend of the second or trend of the moment. And so I think that's been a pretty big challenge is to discern between the two right now because 2 years ago when toilet paper flew off the shelves and everyone said, what is happening? Was that for the moment or was that going to be perpetual? And so I do think it's important to be able to delineate between those. And that can be difficult.
Yeah, no, I think you bring up a really good point there in terms of what's short term and what's long term, right? Because I think right now a lot of industries are dealing with very short term lead times, like just getting the truck on the road from point A to point B or getting the raw materials and those types of things. But those are all very short term, like keep the business running. What are the long term trends and how do you probably tackle both of them at the same time so that you're continuing to run the business or supporting your clients? But also setting up for the future. So appreciate that. Great. So now we'll turn this question a little bit and put it in front of Christian. So Christian, you've got a very diverse background with Kuehne+Nagel in the freight industry. You said you worked in pharma industry for a little bit, and now you're a consultant at EY, right? So kind of bringing all those experiences together, what do you see as the most significant trend that we're seeing in that industry today?
Right. Thanks, Michael. So just want to make the bridge to what Victoria said in terms of what supply chains need. That will dictate what is the, let's say, hottest trend. If we look overall and in the past 2 years, I would say the most relevant trend would be how do we manage risk, right? So supply chain risk management. In this perspective, how do we build the capability for suppliers in tier 2 or 3? How do we get the visibility to see when we will experience a shortage, and how do we forecast and how do we manage that? So if I bundle them up all together, considering the COVID on top, which was a big disruptor, I would say the main trend would be risk. How do we manage risk? And then under this umbrella, I would say, okay, digitalization. This is huge because every single touch that we do, every manual input that we have is due to, let's say, other variables that can create inaccuracy, can create a bullwhip effect in our supply chain, so distort the reality, right? So digitalization will help us, as for example we see blockchain, right? Under this, it will provide a secure supply chain. It will provide interconnected blocks to share among the partners, so a tightly knit network. So risk, digitalization, and finally, let's not forget about the human aspect, right? In these challenging times, as we are all communicating via Teams, we do not, let's say, feel the presence of one another. We do not see all the, let's say, human language, body language and human interaction that we are so used to, especially if you're an extrovert. So all these combined, I would say, having a risk mindset, digitalizing in the meantime all the touch points that you have, and maintaining this human aspect to also be capable to have empathy and to make friends and collaborate with your partners in your supply chain. I would say these top 3 is most relevant trends, and please feel free to add if I missed anything. I'm sure there are other 99 elements or 99 trends on the hype cycle currently hot, depending on the industry, but I would say these 3 are the most significant right now.
Yeah, no, it's really good, Christian, and I think I would answer relatively similar to that, and I think to your last point about the human aspect to it, right? I think maybe historically a lot of organizations, whether enterprise corporations or transportation, were maybe a little bit more transactional, and now those kind of understanding that the relationship and really having visibility to that and collaboration is probably key. To look beyond the next 30, 60, 90 days, but out years in advance. So appreciate that. That was enlightening. Anything from the other panelists to add on trends in the industry before we move on to the next?
Yeah, I think that's a really great call out. You're making me think about the fact that I was talking about education before, but also, I mean, for service providers, it's easy. I mean, the more you get, you're really well versed in your job. You can, it's second nature to you. You can forget how many people are still, or how many, customers, but people in general that are shipping stuff, but they make widgets, right? Like they're not moving widgets. That's their specialty. They make the widgets. We're moving it, and then like and maybe they get up to speed with what transportation was. So not only are we, like, Victoria was saying, like, are we trying to adapt with, what's going on? And, Mike, like you were saying, like, is this the new normal? Is this temporary? And then, but also then having to translate that to customers. We're having to do it all the time now. Transit time analysis for a customer and say, yes, we used to be able to do this, but now your transit times are going from 3 days to 5 days, and that's the new norm. And we also have, market trends are showing that is a new norm, right? There's no end in sight for that.
There was a recent article I saw. I don't remember if it was which news outlet it was, but it was saying that in the future, the next round of CEOs are not going to be coming from the finance realm. They're going to be coming from the supply chain realm. We have become the very interesting topic, and that is a trend, right? Like because people are realizing how critical it is to everything that's happening in the world. And that's a good trend for all of us who are in this industry, right? Like it's a clear path that we are highly valuable. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, Victoria. I think you've never heard the word supply chain more than you have in the last 2 years. So it's nice for the focus to come on this industry, but also I think it's presented a lot of challenges. But I would argue a very exciting industry and space to get into right now. So right, I feel I jumped into it right as things got really, really exciting. So, and I don't think there's any trajectory for that to stop in the near future. So good. Okay. We'll move this one. This one's actually going to come back to you, Christian, and talk about, so the real question is going to be, right, you've had a lot of experiences that you've shared with us so far. Talk about what's been your most rewarding experience thus far in your career in one of your roles.
Right. So here it's difficult because it's always there are highlights that in the moment, that 1 second of, let's say, celebration makes up for all those months or nights or how many hard and difficulties times we've had. I would just want to link it to a recent project we just completed regarding warehousing optimization. So I would say this was the most appreciated, or I would say it's the highlight of my career so far, because of the impact that we've made in terms of being on the shop floor with the operators, with the employees, doing the data analysis on the site, communicating that to the management, going back to the shop floor, explaining in their own language how each piece of work that they do, they contribute right to the improvement that we're making to the program that we're deploying there. So at the end of the project, I would just say, as we recently finished, it was excruciating intensely. So because of course people are reluctant to change in the beginning, and they're reluctant to share because you are trying to improve their work, but you have to communicate this to their own perspective, to their own frame of mind. And seeing that change over this journey of a couple of months, and seeing back how we created this bond as more than professional, even closer as just people that we can interact and we can want to give each other a hand to improve our work. Seeing that and how we overcame this hurdle in the beginning, which was for example, the operators you couldn't imagine that they would ever want to collaborate, or So seeing their dedication and passion and efforts at the end of the program made it all worth it. So in the end, just if I could extract the golden nugget, the team bonding here is exceptionally important. Because you can be the best in the world at what you're doing, you can have the best program, you can bring all these fancy things, but if it doesn't click with the people that you work with in many different ways, so you can fully onboard them, nothing will move, right? So yeah, it's an iceberg and you're gonna end up like Titanic or something. So we don't want that. But I would just say that this is the highlight, the teamwork that we did, and being able to work with the diverse pool of people in our field for this particular project was the most satisfying so far. But I would like to, I mean, I'm sure our panelists can share some more moments, blissful moments. So yeah, Victoria, what was the moment for you?
I think probably most rewarding, similar, I worked third shift in a warehouse. That's a difficult shift. It's a difficult situation. And I think it was most rewarding when I actually learned to load, like got on the front lines, learned how to drive a forklift. I can slide stack. I can load, like picking, catching. I learned everything, right? And after completing all that training and being able to do the same things that my team could do, that's when I earned their respect. And I think that was the most rewarding, is like they wanted to work with me or were willing to work with me in some situations when they weren't thrilled, but they were, because they understood that I knew what they were going through. And I think that was rewarding, in that like I didn't just get the respect because I had a title, but I had to earn it. And then when I earned it, I think that was the pinnacle.
I think that's a really good point you bring up, Victoria. And I've had my time in a manufacturing or distribution, like physical environment is, I had one internship, but I think it's a really important experience to get at some point, to actually see things really hands-on and be on the floor, and kind of take a lot of the things we talk about from a supply chain perspective and actually like physically see them in action. I think it's very like rewarding, and just like puts a lot of context to the work that you're doing, and seeing like how it's actually like firsthand executed. So I appreciate that.
I feel like I'm just going to be echoing all of that, because what popped in my head was like some of my first leadership opportunities, and just the collaboration that I've had and respect that I was able to gain was such an accomplishment. We like you were saying, like when your team members, you got to earn that respect, and being able to do that. And Christian, to your point, I just had so many examples flood my mind of just the value that everyone brings, and being able to not only communicate. It is tough and a constant development that you have to work on, to be able to communicate the value you're trying to achieve through someone else's eyes. Like it's through their perspective, and that's the most important. But like being able to do that with some of the employees that I've had in the past, a few of them are actually like really great friends of mine. One messaged me the other day saying, "Oh, I was so excited in this interview. I was raving about process improvement, and that was like the most inspiring moment," and all this stuff that it's like that, that you like every Monday in our meeting we had to go over, but it ended up being so exciting, and I brought it up in an interview, and there's just so many things that I learned through them, and getting their respect, and just putting ideas on them. Like I think of ideas 24/7. There's no way I could come up with the best idea. It's just impossible. So let me just spit this out there, or here's what I'm thinking, direction I want to go. I just want to see what comes out of your minds. And it's so rewarding, and you just constantly grow and develop from that. So win-win.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think that's another good point too, is listening to those that are on the front lines, because a lot of them have been there for some time and have really good understanding of the actual physical processes and where some of those improvements could come from. So great, good. Okay, we'll transition over to the next question now, which is around job transition, which I think some folks in listening in today would probably be interested in terms of transitioning internally at your company and transitioning from one job to another, or transitioning to another company early in your career. So Victoria and Chelsea, I know you both have some experiences in transitioning companies. So Victoria, we'll tee this one up to you first, and just kind of talk about your experiences or the struggles behind that.
I think for especially anyone who's on the call who's a student right now, when you're graduating undergrad, you don't know what you want to do. Like, you think you know what you want to do, but if you haven't had an internship in it, or you haven't actually been in there in that type of role, it's really hard to gauge what like you truly think you want to do for the rest of your career, right? Like, how do you know that at 20 years old, right? It's really difficult. So when I graduated, I'd had a couple internships, and I knew what I liked and what I didn't like from the internships, but also hadn't experienced a lot of different areas. Let's be real, supply chain there's so many different routes you can go, anything from planning to execution to operations. Like, the options are boundless, really. And so I got out and I started working, like I mentioned, I worked as a software engineer in supply chain. And for me, I loved the company, culture was amazing, but I quickly realized, like, I didn't love staring at a screen all day and not having any human interaction. Like, that killed my soul. Like, I needed humans. And so I realized, like, I was not going to be able to grow in that role or in that path because it just I wasn't passionate about it. I could have just twiddled my thumbs and done the job and gotten by, but I wasn't excited about what I was doing because I just wanted to talk to other people, really. So I made the decision 1 year into my career path to pivot and say, this is not my path. I really want to be back in the operations side. Like, I missed the hands-on. I missed being like on the floor in a manufacturing setting that I'd had in that internship. And so I had reconnected with some of my former colleagues and my former boss at the internship to really go check that out. And so I did. I went back and worked there for a couple of years. I mentioned third shift it's a hard shift, but you learn everything. There's no one else there to help you make decisions. Like, you have to figure it out. And I think those couple of years on third shift launched me in my career path in terms of the things I learned, the things I experienced, and really that set me on my trajectory to really move up through the ranks and get that director title before I was 30 and move up and really get those consulting roles and just the knowledge you gain. Like I say, you can spend 5 years in a role twiddling your thumbs, or you can spend 5 years changing the world. And so, like, it's up to you how much you're going to dive in and accomplish. But those are the types of roles that don't look as pretty on the outside, but once you're in it, it sets you up for success further on in your career tremendously. From there, I went back to grad school. I realized that I really love learning. I'm a nerd. I geek out. I love to learn. And so I decided at that point to go back. So I quit my job. Scariest but most liberating thing I've ever done, when you're like, I don't know if I'm going to get another paycheck immediately in the future, but I'm going to go learn and add value to my knowledge base. And from there, after that, that's when I went into research and was an industry analyst for 5 years. So I think what's hard is it's really intimidating when you're first making a job decision out of school to feel like you have to decide on the exact company and role you want. But realistically, it's a very slim chance that you're going to get exactly what you want, and it's going to be the thing that you do for the next 40 years of your career path. I think what's more realistic is to set a list of skills that you want to learn about and experience, and then use that as your continued growth path. And if you're not getting it from an organization or a company, or you're not seeing a learning path for you, or you're not being supported, then it's okay. I know that if we have some folks in the audience who manage younger folks, that, I said to my mom when I was going to change jobs after a year, and she was horrified. Like, she spent 35 years at the same company. She's like, you can't change jobs now. You've only been there a year. But it was like, no, I'm not going to be good at this job. This is not my path. This is not my passion. Like, let me change now instead of getting 5 years down this path that I'm miserable in and then change, because then it's really late and it's really hard. So don't be afraid to think like that. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. Chelsea, what about you?
Yeah, kind of the same mentality again, that just going off of, don't be close to any experiences. Like you said, like, I had no idea. When I graduated high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. So that took some chasing down of like, okay, what's a good fit for me? Like you were saying, like, am I good at this job? And then also equally important, do I like it? Should be good at something and not enjoy it. So there's so many different avenues I started to go down. But getting into supply chain, I mean, I never, again, I kept, like I said earlier, I kind of just kept equating that to like more like the operations, or even, I came from like a port town, so I'm thinking like oh, look over, at the port, or oh, hey, I'm big. Did I freeze?
You're good. I think we all zoomed in at once.
Okay. Yeah, no, you're good.
But yeah, so there's so many different things that like what I thought was transportation and logistics, I was just like, I'm not interested in that, and was so close to missing all the opportunities I've had over the past almost a decade now, that I just happened to, again, get that internship. And I was nervous to even apply for that because I don't know anything about transportation, but put my best foot forward, ended up getting that, and again, just got so much exposure to, I didn't have a clue that I was really good at analytics. And in the operations role, I was like operations support, ended up doing a lot of analytics and diving into data and being able to pitch things to the director at the time that was my supervisor. So I'm like, yeah, I noticed this. Am I reading this right? Just out of questions and trying to learn, and was catching some major, like 20 grand a month cost saving opportunities. Like, oh, let me dive into this. And that analytics got me an opportunity over in the sales side, which I actually thought I might be good at sales. And then being over in the sales, like administrative and analytics and things, learned I don't want to do sales. So this was something I thought I might like to do. I had no interest in once I got closer to it. But in that role, ended up learning a lot more about project management and process improvement things. But by the time I graduated, I wouldn't have known existed if it weren't for that role and just trying to find ways to improve what we were doing. And then discovered, oh, this is its own vertical. Like, holy cow. So just making sure that you're, or what's been my whole path and success is make sure you're open to those opportunities and taking that leap. Like me quitting my job, that I need like a lot of health insurance and stuff, and I was terrified to quit my last job. So as Victoria can attest, my move up to Boston was quite terrifying. But I'm over the moon. It could not have been a better opportunity in itself. And I even told myself, like, even if this is just a year, it doesn't work out, like, again, like Victoria was saying, at the end of that year, so many doors will have been opened that year will be worth it. And I'll know by the end of then, like, do I need to pivot, or is this my next huge trajectory? So being open in those opportunities, because you never know. If it seems like, hey, I could try this out, you might want to just run with it, because it's gonna steer you right where you need to go.
And I do want to add, I'm not saying change every single year, but take the time to look at what you're doing, trying something, and decide if it's the right path that that you enjoy and you like and you're excited about.
I should say I was with my previous companies technically for like 6 or 7 years, and then made a change when it was not meeting my needs, when it was not supporting me, and I wasn't growing, and I knew it wasn't a good fit at that point. So it was a good 6 or 7 years, and I'm like, oh, this is good. Oh, or internally, Mike, like you were saying earlier, there's a lot of changes you can make internally. And I went to a couple different departments that just kept evolving into all this exposure and education that was well worth it.
Great. Yeah, no, thanks so much for both of your feedback and comments around it. I think really good to hear that from someone who's experienced it firsthand. So before I move into our last formal question, just want to send out a quick reminder for those tuned in. If you do have questions for the panel broadly or for a specific panelist, please feel free to send it through the Q&A chat, which should be in your panel on the side. So last question is going to be for Victoria. And anyone else who wants to jump in. But Victoria, just talk a little bit about the skills that have helped you most throughout your career path.
Yeah, I think the biggest skill that has helped is just to be curious. Ask a lot of questions. And you don't have to do it in an aggressive manner, but just asking, oh, can you explain to me like how that works or why that is the way? Because you don't know what you don't know. And if you don't ask questions, you can't really grow. Or you might grow, but you may not ever learn why something works or doesn't work the way it does. I had an awesome professor in undergrad who made us sit down and benchmark our entire career path, like the next 40 to 50 years of your life. What are you going to do and when are you going to do it? And it's not that she wanted us to know at 20 years old what we were going to do with the next 50 years of our lives. But her point was, if you set goals and benchmarks, you'll know if you're getting to those points or not. And she also made us look at, hey, if I want to get to this role, what are the skills I need along the way, and what are the different roles I need to experience to get there? Because if you never make that plan, you can't get there if you're lacking in those skills. So it was really just to be able to benchmark, like we do in supply chain, but to benchmark if you were making that progress. So I really think be curious, make some sort of plan. You may never hit that plan. You may throw it out the window in 2 months. But if you don't make that plan, you won't know if you're progressing. So ask lots of questions, make yourself a plan. And the other one is just be humble when you ask those questions and take on that learning and really embrace it, because there's a lot that you learn on the go. There's a lot that you won't know. And the more you know, just the further and faster you're going to go. So those are the big things, I think. I mean, anyone can learn a supply chain industry eventually as you ask questions, but if you aren't asking the questions, if you aren't humble about learning, it's going to take you a lot longer to get there. So I think those are really the keys that I've found for success, at least. But I don't know if you guys have anything else to add on that.
Can I add, well, it's made me think about the like recency bias is a very real thing. Like just what has someone said to you recently that's going to stick out the most, so that they embarrassed themselves 2 weeks ago and then they got you chocolates yesterday. That's going to be what sticks in your mind, right? Terrible analogy, but whatever happened most recently is going to stick in your mind. So when you ask those questions, and this is something I keep reminding me of to this day, but couldn't agree more, V, that the asking those questions, you might be nervous or insecure to say like, oh, I look like I don't know what I'm doing. Let me just, well, definitely be humble and also like try Googling it first. Don't put in the work for sure. So you're being respectful of that person's time. But definitely be curious. They're going to appreciate that. And then even if by some stretch of the imagination, someone does feel like, why don't they should definitely know this by now. Well, you're that much more educated that next week you're going to be able to speak so much more intelligently to what you're doing. You're going to be that much more prepared. And that's what they're going to see next week. Next time you're in a meeting, you're going to be way more educated now that you asked that question. And we're curious about that stuff. So either they'll love you for your ambition and that curiosity and your investment, or they're just going to be that like 1 week in between that and when you really show your stuff the next time, because you're that much more educated. So definitely couldn't agree with that more. How about you, Christian?
I will make a summary. So key takeaways would be time management in terms of skills, prioritization. Please do not act like everything is on fire, because it's not. Sometimes we get overwhelmed. I learned this from an emergency room TED talk, right? People are dying. So when people are dying, that's a code red, right? I don't want to be overly dramatic, but just to put things in perspective. So managing priorities in terms of urgency is key. And finally, this is the encompassing overarching theme for tonight, or for everything we're doing in our lives: communication. Wearing different hats, understanding what kind of personality we're talking to. There's this framework: green, yellow, blue, and red personalities. There's another book you can check in terms of 7 different hats. So what we're doing, we're constantly adapting to the communication style of our peers in order to be able to be effective communicators. So to summarize: time management, prioritization, communication. And of course, echoing what Victoria and Chelsea already mentioned.
Awesome. Great. Thanks so much. Well, we've got a couple questions here that have flowed through the Q&A. So we'll, and we've got more coming. So we'll get to those now. And we'll put up the list of panelists again in our companies. And if you want, feel free to reach out with us on LinkedIn as well. So the first question, and it's going to be a broad question, so whoever wants to jump on it, feel free, is around mentorship. So what is your opinion about mentorship in your career? Is there any suggestions on how to find a good mentor and how to maintain a good mentorship?
I always maintain a couple different mentors, and by maintain, I mean I stay in touch with, because mentorship is an ongoing dialogue. But I have maintained a relationship with a professor from college. So she isn't in supply chain, but she has, has that entrepreneurial spirit, and she's very good at networking, and she's just a really good voice of reason when it comes to making decisions on career path decisions. But I've also maintained a mentor in my own industry. And so I try and balance with someone in my field versus someone not who just has a business perspective. But finding one, I think it's if you get involved with CSCMP, shameless plug, we have a mentor program that's more formalized, but also just going to local roundtable events. You're going to meet people, find people in your company who you aspire to be like one day, and just say, can I have 30 minutes and have coffee with you? Those are the types of informal mentorships that are so valuable, because then you just get another voice to talk to. But yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Take that, the mentality of or the vision you have of a mentorship relationship. Usually you're thinking of someone much more senior than you, much more experienced, all of that, especially one of the biggest things I learned in CSCMP, shameless plug, is how diverse people my age, even younger than me, so much more. Everyone has different experiences, right? So I've learned so much from my peers, arguably as much as anyone more tenured than me that has more experience, directly above me or something. So if you take away that, I'll say stigma, but that mentality that of what a mentorship relationship is, it's literally, like Victoria said, grabbing a cup of coffee, asking those questions, don't do I think it's a Sheryl Sandberg quote of don't play that are you my mentor? It doesn't have to be formal like that, because sometimes you make it awkward, you kind of force that when you wouldn't even have to. There's a lot of the next senior manager or something, a tier or two above you, just go ask them a question. If you have something really specific in mind, what do you want to know about it? Don't just say, hey, let's have coffee and give me advice, mentor me, have a specific question. What do you want to know about? And then go ask them. And usually, especially as you go up, people love to share what they know. It makes them feel good about themselves. So there's so much value you can get around everything. Just go ask the questions. Echoing in, be curious. People are going to appreciate that, and then you have all the value of mentorship without having to formally meet 30 minutes a week or something.
I'm just going to add a note. In a mentor-mentee relationship, mentees should own the relationship, because you need to drive what you want to get out of it. Mentor can't read your mind. They don't know what you need to know or want to know. They might have some suggestions, but if you're the mentee, you should be driving that conversation.
Great. So moving on to the next question here. This is from a recent college graduate. The question is, how do post-college resumes differ from college resumes? Do you have any tips for reformatting resumes after graduation?
I dropped my graduation year. That was just me because of the amount of experience, but I also moved my education to the bottom, because once you've started working, your education is relevant, but it's more your work experience that's going to speak to it, because maybe you got a degree in something that is not as relevant. You still got the degree, you want it on there, but I want to talk about the relevant work experience first, because that's the first thing they're going to see. That's just my thoughts on it, but I don't know.
Christian, you laughed. Did you have something to say to that?
I would say resumes are always the tricky part. How do I sell myself, right? Maybe not exactly like that, but you want to showcase and you want to represent in a nutshell what you're bringing to the table, right? So definitely agree with Victoria to put the work experience first, as we've seen recently in many examples. Employers value skills and experience over degrees and titles and everything else. So as long as you can showcase that, it's a secure case for a win. Chelsea,
yeah, so you might not. I've seen before too, when I was doing hiring, and I have to pass resumes by my superiors, and they don't know. I still don't. At this point, don't know what is being taught in certain courses and stuff. The further you are removed from the university, the more you're you could have all the education that I might want you to have, but I don't know that by the the title of a class or something like that, or a club or something. So I agree. Maybe I mean, starting with that experience, get involved in internships. So you can say, you can start that of, I worked here, maybe it was 10 hours a week, but you still worked there. You got exposure to a real life environment where they need you to have some experience there. The education's great, but yeah, what have you done? How can I apply this? So I don't know what classes you're taking or what they entail. That's not going to help me make a decision. And what best advice I've gotten is that resume, or that I love, is resume is to get you an interview. So keeping that's always helped me kind of structure mine of, I'm not trying to completely, I mean, sell myself. Yeah, so you want to come talk to me and I can tell you more, but like, I don't need to put it all on there. Here's everything I've accomplished. Like, here's why you want to talk to me. Here's what's relevant. Here's why you care.
Yeah, great. And we've got another question that's kind of similar, so or at least ties in, so I'll bring it to the front here. Have you been hired for jobs? And I think necessarily it doesn't have to be if you've been hired, but maybe just like give some context around it, for jobs that you found through networking or applying online.
I haven't applied to a job since my undergrad. Like every job I've had has been through network. And it's because when people get to know you, and that's also a shameless plug for CSCMP, get involved, because the more people know you, the more it is that they recognize the skills you have and they think of you when they're thinking of opportunities. So definitely encourage networking because it's a differentiator if against a bunch of, you know, blank resume, not blank resumes, but resumes that are in front of a hiring manager with no context. If you're a person that they know and they can put a name to a face, it's going to jump you ahead.
Awesome, great. Thanks for that context, Victoria. We've got a few minutes left here and a couple more questions to tackle. So the next question is going to be, what is a common misconception you constantly hear in your industry or supply chain? Tough one.
Yeah. Do we have examples of those perceptions?
Common misconception.
It's broad.
I think maybe like one thing that I always go to is, and someone on the panel alluded to this earlier, is like, I think as Victoria talking about like, oh, all executives have like finance backgrounds, right? And now supply chains maybe becoming so much more relevant, but we don't have necessarily like the finance background. So maybe just like how, I don't know, maybe that'll tee something up for you, but just kind of how our background is a lot different than others in terms of like the business knowledge, but really understanding the operational side of things. Maybe something that comes to mind for me at least.
I also would say that I mean, mentality, I think this is very largely just at least US in general, maybe not our industry, but I think we're all guilty of it. Like earlier in our careers is like working harder and looking like you're working harder is more valuable. Yes, you want to be present. You want to make sure you're always like there just in case you get an opportunity to, you know, be a fly on the wall at a meeting or something. But also if you're not taking care of yourself, I'm to this day guilty of this, if you're not taking care of yourself outside of that and having that balance, you're going to burn out so quickly. You're not going to be as creative and it's not actually making you look that much better. So again, the example, like the next meeting you're in, if you're exhausted because you were at the office till 10 o'clock the night before working on something else, now you're tired and underprepared, that's what they're going to see. So having that balance, I think, is way more important than we give it credit for.
And I would add a common misconception. There's one tool that will solve all our problems. So there's this black box in which we throw all our problems and it's going to be fine. So that's definitely a common misconception. And maybe more also relevant for the recent grads is that even though the age is not a determinant anymore of capability or skill or confidence. So I see that misconception a lot in terms of young people's fresh new ideas, as you guys were mentioning earlier. You could generate them 24/7, right, Chelsea, like you mentioned, but there must be more credit there. I see this misconception that due to the appearance, oh, he has no idea what he's talking about, even though the recent graduates or just people starting their careers bring actually valuable input to the table. So if you find a way to put it in numbers and make a 2 slides or 3 slides presentation to showcase beyond the appearance, hey, I have a case here, it can make sense. Like Chelsea also mentioned, 20K a month, that's huge. So if you can showcase that, all the appearance will disappear.
I think the funniest misconception is people outside of supply chain who assume that there is only one supply chain. And usually they'll be like, hey, do you know why I haven't gotten my package yet? And I'm like, I don't know that supply chain, but I could probably guess based on, maybe it's like the Suez Canal or like things like that. But yeah, I think that's the funniest outside misconception.
That is what, like, how interconnected they are. Like we're so impacted by something going on in there's a tsunami or something over like in Asia. Well, if that disrupts what's going on at like an actual like crossing the ocean and everything, all those shipping containers coming over, and then container ships coming over, and then that creates a buildup at the LA port, and then all of this stuff. So I'm up in say like Jersey, and like why can I not get a container? That problem's on that side. Well, we can't get any containers out. Like everything's so connected, and there's so many different moving parts to it. So it's just like a giant web that you wouldn't think like where's my Amazon package? I ordered this like 4 days ago. I'm a Prime member. What the heck? Well, if you think about all these different things that could possibly impact, if there's a hurricane that happened to somehow go this route, so then everyone's FEMA's getting sent into that area, and it's like there's so many different things that like completely can impact, you would never guess, impact what's going on in your area.
Great. Thanks so much. So I think we've got time for one more question, and this one is an interesting one directed at you, Christian. It ties back to the 3 challenges you mentioned around risk mitigation, digitization, and kind of the human aspect there. So one thing, and maybe you can speak to it from a European aspect, because in the US, right, from an inflation standpoint, there's a lot of wage pressures in terms of like manufacturing labor. And I think, right, it can tie back to like truck drivers and whatnot as well. So I guess just, do you think that senior executives and management should change their perspective or aspect of the supply chain given some of the wage pressures? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Wow, that escalated quickly. No, this is a serious question, and I would say I've seen different companies treat this question differently, right? So, especially if you look at startups or any tech companies, they usually cap their own. There are some examples in which CEOs cap their own salary to the same, let's say 80K, the median or the average salary per year, just to show the commitment. Hey, we're in this together, and we want to drive this company forward. So this is more startup mentality. And the more and more we see, let's say in other multinational corporate environments, the executives are much more, let's say, reliant on their teams, and they're willing to share a big piece of cake with as long as their results, of course, or let's say performance driven, goal driven. As also Victoria mentioned, it's super important to have a goal in front of you. So I would say in terms of wage pressure, these are economical factors that we cannot control just from a supply chain standpoint. It's also demographic. It's also, let's say, global economy, more or less. What we can do, what it's in our control, in our hands, is to skill up. The more you are skilled, the more you are wanted in the, let's say, job market, and then you have a word to say, hey, I have a different offer. Unless we can work this together because I really want to work for your firm. I would see myself at that range, right? So you have a little bit of leverage. So just always thinking how we can bring this to our own control is to scale up education experience-wise, but also building a brand around yourself. I think that CSCMP can help you with that a lot in terms of expanding your network. So long story short, you become valuable, and where the value goes, the money flows, right? So I wouldn't worry about wage pressure.
Great, thanks so much. Appreciate that that answer there, Christian. So that concludes, and right at the hour here, that concludes our first CSCMP Young Professionals Career Panel. Appreciate the great audience we had today, and appreciate the panelists for joining us, of course, and walking through and answering some of my questions and some of the great questions from the Q&A. So appreciate everyone joining, and hope you have a good rest of your day, and look forward to connecting again soon.
And don't forget to apply to be on Young Professionals Committee. Application closes Monday.
Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. And thanks, guys.